Emily had never been the kind of woman who looked for love in crowded rooms. She preferred quiet spaces, safe corners, and people who spoke less but meant more. That evening, when she walked into her friend Olivia's dinner party in Boston, she expected nothing more than polite conversations and maybe a glass of wine before slipping away early. She didn't know that one introduction would change the rhythm of her heart. Daniel was not the first person she noticed. The room was full of chatter, the clinking of glasses, and laughter that rose above the music playing softly in the background. He stood quietly near the bookshelf, not trying to outshine anyone, not forcing his presence on the crowd. When Olivia waved Emily over and said, "You two should meet," Emily offered a polite smile, thinking it would be another brief exchange. But Daniel's smile was different. It wasn't rehearsed, and it didn't carry the weight of trying too hard. It was warm, almost shy, the kind of smile that made Emily pause for a heartbeat longer than she should have. He asked her how she knew Olivia, and instead of turning the conversation back to himself like most people did, he listened. He asked follow-up questions, not because he had to, but because he was genuinely interested. Emily found herself talking more than she had planned. About her work as a graphic designer, about the small coffee shop she visited every morning, about the sketches she filled her notebook with when she couldn't sleep. Daniel listened, like those details mattered. And when he finally spoke about himself, it wasn't to impress but to share. He told her about his job in architecture, his love for photography, how he often walked around the city just to capture the way sunlight touched the old buildings. Hours passed like minutes. By the time Emily realized how late it was, the room had already emptied. Olivia was stacking plates. The music had stopped. And yet Emily and Daniel were still there, talking as if they had known each other for years. Walking home that night, Emily replayed their conversation in her mind. It had been so natural, so easy, that she almost forgot how cautious she usually was. Past relationships had taught her not to fall too quickly. She had loved before, and she had been left with pieces she wasn't sure she could put back together. That was why she had promised herself to stay guarded, to protect her heart from more disappointment. But something about Daniel unsettled that promise. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic moment. Just a quiet certainty that she hadn't felt in a long time. The next day, when she found a message from him simple, not overdone, just "I really enjoyed last night. Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" Her heart skipped. She told herself to be careful, to take it slow. Yet she typed back yes before she could stop herself. Their coffee meetings began casually. A quick drink between work hours, then walks around the city streets. Emily found herself laughing at things she didn't expect to be funny, sharing thoughts she hadn't planned to reveal. Daniel had a way of making the world feel lighter, as though burdens could be set aside for just a little while. But as days turned into weeks, Emily began to notice more than just the comfort of his presence. She noticed how his eyes softened when he listened, how he remembered details she thought she had mumbled and forgotten. She noticed how he wasn't in a rush to impress her, but instead gave space for their connection to grow naturally. Still, the caution inside her lingered. Could someone really be this genuine? Could someone truly see her without an agenda, without an angle? Life had taught her that the people who seemed too good often carried shadows she didn't see at first. And as much as she wanted to believe Daniel was different, a voice inside her whispered that she needed to be careful. One evening, they walked by the harbor, the city lights reflecting across the water. The air was cool, the kind of evening where silence felt as meaningful as words. Emily caught herself looking at him, wondering if she was foolish to let hope grow again. Daniel glanced at her and smiled, as though he had read her thoughts. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," he said gently. Emily laughed softly, brushing it off. "I just think too much." He didn't press, but his hand brushed against hers in a way that was both casual and deliberate. She didn't pull away. For a moment, it felt as though the universe had paused to give her a choice, to step into something new or retreat into safety. She didn't decide that night, but she felt the shift. Something was beginning, something fragile but alive, yet beneath all the warmth. There was a thread of unease she couldn't ignore. She didn't know why, but part of her feared that the closer she got to Daniel, the more she would discover something she wasn't ready to face. For now, though she let herself enjoy the spark, even as a quiet question echoed in her mind. Was this the start of love? Or the beginning of another lesson in heartbreak? And unknown to her, Daniel carried a secret, one he hadn't spoken of yet, one that had the power to change everything, she thought. She was beginning to understand about him. The days after Emily agreed to meet Daniel again felt like a new season in her life. What started as coffee breaks slowly turned into dinners, long walks, and late-night calls that stretched until her phone battery begged for rest. Every time she thought she had him figured out, he surprised her with another layer of kindness. He didn't just ask about her day, he remembered it. He followed up on small things she mentioned in passing, like the meeting she was nervous about or the painting she had left unfinished. For Emily, who had always felt overlooked in past relationships, this attention was new. It was steady, grounding, and quietly reassuring. Their moments together were simple, yet unforgettable. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel took her to a bookstore tucked away on a quiet Boston street. Emily had mentioned her love for reading once, casually, but he remembered. "I thought you'd like this place," he said, holding the door open. Inside, surrounded by shelves of worn novels and the smell of old paper, Emily felt at home. Daniel walked beside her without rushing, letting her pick through titles, listening as she talked about her favorite authors. When she glanced at him, she caught him smiling. Not at the books, but at her. That look stayed with her long after they left. Emily's friends noticed the change in her. Olivia, who had introduced them, teased her gently. "You smile when his name comes up," she said one evening. "I haven't seen you like this in years." Emily laughed it off, but deep inside, she knew it was true. She felt lighter, as if Daniel's presence had softened the edges of her guarded heart. One night, Daniel invited her to a small cafe lit with warm fairy lights. They sat outside, the cool air brushing against them as music played softly in the background. He reached across the table and took her hand. Emily froze for a second, her pulse quickening, but his touch was steady. "Emily," he said, his voice low, "you make me feel like I've finally come home." The words slipped past her defenses. She wanted to believe him. In his eyes, there was no hint of doubt, only sincerity. Her heart beat faster, and for a moment, she let herself imagine what it would mean if this truly was the beginning of something lasting. She didn't say much in return, only squeezed his hand, but inside, her emotions swirled. That night, as she walked back to her apartment, her thoughts raced. Everything felt almost too perfect. Daniel wasn't just attentive. He was exactly the kind of man she had dreamed of meeting, but had stopped believing existed. And that scared her, because if life had taught her one thing, it was that perfect beginnings often carried hidden endings. The following week, Emily returned home after a long day at work to find an envelope in her mailbox. It was plain, no stamp, no return address, just her name written neatly on the front. Curious, she opened it right there in the hallway. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message was short, but it hit her like ice water. "Do you really know who Daniel is?" Emily stood frozen, reading the words again. There was no explanation, no signature, only that haunting question. Her mind spun with confusion. Who would send this? Why? Was it a prank? Or was there something about Daniel she didn't know? She tried to brush it aside, but the thought dug into her. Over the next few days, she found herself studying him more closely. The way he sometimes paused before answering questions about his past. The way he quickly shifted the topic when family came up. The details he didn't share. Details she hadn't noticed before because she was too caught up in how he made her feel. One evening, while they walked near the river, Emily asked lightly, "You've never really told me much about your family? Where are they?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "It's complicated," he said softly, squeezing her hand before steering the conversation toward her upcoming work project. Emily let it go, but her mind didn't. The letter had planted a seed of doubt. She tried to ignore it, reminding herself of all the ways Daniel had shown his sincerity. But at night, when she lay awake, the question returned, "Do you really know who Daniel is?" her heart wrestled with her head. She wanted to trust him, to believe in the man who made her laugh and listen to her like no one else. But she also knew the cost of ignoring warning signs. She had done that before, and it had broken her. One Friday, as she walked home, she decided to search his name online. It felt wrong, like betraying his trust, but curiosity pressed harder than guilt. She typed Daniel Carter Boston into the search bar, not expecting much. At first, the race. Emily told herself the photo didn't have to mean anything. Maybe it was old. Maybe it was taken out of context. But the word fiancé kept flashing in her mind, louder than any excuse she tried to make. The following days felt heavy. Every time Daniel smiled at her, she wondered if there was truth behind it. Every time he held her hand, she wondered whose hand he had held before. She hated doubting him, but the letter in her mailbox had opened a door she couldn't close. At work, she found herself distracted, staring at her computer screen, but seeing only Daniel's face beside the unknown woman. When Olivia invited her for lunch, Emily almost said nothing, but the pressure was too much to carry alone. She pulled out her phone, showed her friend the photo, and whispered, "Why didn't he tell me this?" Olivia's eyebrows lifted. "Emily, maybe there's an explanation. People have pasts. You should ask him directly." Emily nodded, but fear tightened in her chest. Confrontation meant answers, and answers meant change. A part of her wanted to keep living in the comfort of his presence, pretending nothing was wrong. But another part, the part scarred from past heartbreak, warned her that silence could cost more in the end. That Saturday morning, Daniel texted, "Brunch at the harbor. My treat." Emily almost said no, but curiosity pulled her along. They sat outside at a small restaurant overlooking the water, the sun reflecting on the waves. Daniel talked about a new project at work, his words animated, his eyes glowing with energy. Emily tried to listen, but her mind kept drifting back to the photo. Finally, she asked softly, "Daniel, were you ever engaged?" The smile froze on his lips. For a second, she saw something flicker in his eyes, a shadow, a hesitation. But just as quickly, he shifted back to calm. "Why do you ask?" he said lightly. Emily's heart pounded. She wanted to push, but the fear of what he might say silenced her. She forced a small smile. "Just curious." He changed the subject, and she let him, but her doubts only grew stronger. That evening, back at her apartment, Emily pulled out her laptop again. She dug deeper. More articles, more photos, more mentions of Daniel and Claire Matthews. They looked happy, radiant, like two people planning a future. And then nothing. No wedding photos, no updates. The trail stopped. The silence in that gap spoke louder than words. Something had happened, something he wasn't telling her. The next time they met, Emily watched him more carefully. She noticed how he avoided questions about certain years of his life. She noticed how his expression shifted when people around them mentioned relationships or commitments. Every smile, every laugh, every gentle touch felt slightly different now, like a beautiful painting hiding cracks beneath the paint. One night, after dinner, as they walked through the city streets, Emily couldn't hold back anymore. "Daniel," she said suddenly, "do you ever keep things from me?" He stopped walking, looking at her with surprise. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged, forcing calm into her voice. I want to know if we're being completely honest with each other." He hesitated, then reached for her hand. "Emily, I care about you. I wouldn't lie to you." His voice was steady, his eyes clear. For a moment, she almost believed him completely. Almost. But when she got home that night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the doubts still gnawing at her. His words had been right, but his pause before speaking had been wrong. The following week, Emily received another letter in her mailbox. This time, it was even shorter. Just 3 words written in sharp, bold strokes. "Ask him why." Her hands shook as she held the paper. She didn't know who was sending these notes, or why they cared so much about warning her. But one thing was clear. Someone wanted her to see Daniel's truth. They wouldn't stop until she did. That night, Emily couldn't hide her unease. When Daniel came over, she tried to act normal, but her voice cracked, Her laughter sounded forced. He noticed. "Emily," he said gently, "something's wrong. Talk to me." She looked at him, really looked. The man sitting on her couch had given her joy she hadn't felt in years, but he also carried shadows she couldn't name. Her throat tightened. "Daniel," she whispered, "is there something about your past you haven't told me?" He froze, his expression unreadable. Seconds stretched into silence. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower now. "Everyone has a past, Emily, but sometimes sharing it too soon can ruin what's good in the present." Her heart sank. His answer was careful, too careful. She wanted clarity, but all she got was another wall. For the rest of the evening, she smiled, nodded, pretended everything was fine. But inside, the cracks were widening. She knew she couldn't keep dancing around the truth. Whatever Daniel was hiding, it would eventually come out. Later that week, walking home from work, Emily saw something that made her blood run cold. A man on the street, older and tired-looking, stopped her as she passed. "You're with Daniel, aren't you?" he asked quietly. Emily's eyes widened. "Do I know you?" He shook his head. "No, but I knew Claire." He paused, his gaze heavy. "Be careful. Daniel's not telling you everything." Before she could ask more, the man walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Emily stood frozen on the sidewalk, her heart racing. Claire, the name from the article, the fiancé, the shadow in Daniel's story. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, Emily realized the truth was no longer just a suspicion. It was circling her, pressing closer, demanding to be uncovered. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Dinner tomorrow? I have something to tell you." Emily stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. The words both terrified and relieved her. Maybe, finally, the secret would come to light. Emily barely slept that night. Daniel's message replayed in her mind. "I have something to tell you." The words sat heavy on her chest. She didn't know if she should be hopeful or terrified. Morning came slowly, each hour dragging, her thoughts tangled with possibilities. Was he going to admit everything? Or would he give her another half-truth to keep her close? By evening, she was restless, pacing her apartment. When the knock finally came, she froze, her heart racing. Opening the door, she found Daniel standing there, holding nothing but his nervous expression. He looked different, less steady, almost fragile. Inside, he didn't sit right away. He walked to the window, stared out at the fading light, and exhaled deeply. "Emily," he began softly, "I should have told you sooner. You deserve the truth." She sat quietly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Then tell me," she whispered. Daniel turned to face her, his eyes heavy. 2 years ago, I was engaged. Her name was Claire Matthews. The name landed like a stone between them. Emily's chest tightened, though she had already known. Hearing it from him made it real. "We were together for 3 years," he continued. "She was everything to me. We planned a life, a future. But one night, driving home from a weekend trip, there was an accident. She didn't survive." His voice cracked, and for the first time since she met him, Emily saw his composure break. Tears stung her eyes. The betrayal she had imagined was not betrayal at all. It was grief. Pain he had carried alone. Pain he had hidden because he didn't know how to share it. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel looked down, his shoulders slumping. "Because when I met you, for the first time since losing her, I felt alive again. I was terrified that if you knew, you'd see me as broken, as someone still living in the past. I didn't want you to pity me. I wanted you to see me as the man standing in front of you, not the man who lost someone." Silence filled the room. Emily's emotions swirled: relief, sorrow, anger, compassion. She understood his fear, but she also felt the sting of being kept in the dark. "Daniel," she whispered, "secrets build walls. And I don't want to love someone through walls." He moved closer, his voice unsteady. "I know, I'm sorry. I thought keeping it buried would protect what we had, but instead, it's been haunting us both." His eyes searched hers, pleading not for forgiveness, but for understanding. Emily wiped at her tears. Part of her wanted to walk away, to escape the weight of his grief and the risk of being hurt again. But another part, the part that had seen his kindness, his sincerity, his quiet strength, knew that love wasn't about perfection. Love was about showing up, even with scars. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "Daniel, I can't erase your past. I wouldn't even want to. But if we're going to build something real, I need you to trust me with your whole truth." His grip tightened around her fingers. "I will. No more hiding. No more half-stories. You deserve all of me, even the broken parts." For the first time in weeks, Emily's chest felt lighter. The doubt that had been gnawing at her eased, replaced with a fragile but real hope. The days that followed were not simple. Daniel began opening up about Claire, not every detail at once, but enough to let Emily see the depth of his loss. At first, it was hard for him to speak, hard for her to listen. But through those conversations, something shifted. His love for Claire was not a threat. It was part of his story. And Emily realized she didn't have to compete with the past. She only had to walk with him into the future. One evening, as they sat by the river, Daniel said quietly, "I thought losing Claire meant I'd never feel love again. But then I met you. You've shown me that my heart still has room." His voice broke, but his eyes held steady. Emily felt tears slip down her cheeks, but this time they weren't from fear. "Daniel," she whispered, "I don't need perfect.